All right, we'll call this meeting back to order. So we've got a couple groups from the community coming in at about 3 o'clock. So after the chief presents, I wanted to see if there would be support to move up the final agenda item around, that's basically titled discussion, and the items under that, above the capital portion. Would there be a motion to that extent?
Well, it's not adding to the agenda. So I was just thinking
No, we're
special
just-
meeting versus regular
we're just
meeting.
moving it around.
Consensus
We're moving it
would be
around?
great.
We're not adding, we're just
No,
moving.
we're not adding. We're just moving.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry.
if there's no objection to that, then we will do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Chief, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So this slide shows a proposed operating budget for 4 of the budgets that are managed by the police department. They are the police, dispatch, animal control, and emergency management budgets. We're showing the same 52.36 budgeted FTEs. Of that, the police have 38 sworn officers, 1 administrative assistant, 1 records supervisor, 1 full-time records clerk, 1 part-time records clerk, 1 animal control officer, and 11 crossing guards with 6 substitute crossing guards. The police department provides core services and programs in each of the 3 larger budgets. One is strictly a budget for non-personnel, just some services. The primary services and programs for the police department is to detect, deter, and investigate criminal activity. Most frequently investigated crime continues to be some sort of larceny, and this continues year after year. From our homes, from our places of business, from where we study, from where we recreate, or from our vehicles. In 2019 alone, we investigated 144 larcenies, and that was up 22 from the year before. So of those larcenies last year, 20 of those were stolen vehicles. It's been kind of a hot topic now for us since about 2017. Since 2015, thefts of cars have been on the rise. So 15, we had 6 cars that were stolen from town. 2016, we had 7 cars, and then in 2017, we had 17, the following year, 17, last year, 20.
Did you say that was a trend everywhere, like in the state or in general?
It is a trend everywhere, not just in our
Okay.
state, but in the region, Massachusetts,
Okay,
Rhode
thanks.
Island, yeah.
Chief, any of those cars stolen without the keys in them?
Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
In our town, none.
So just to be clear, every single car that's
Yeah.
been stolen, the resident left the keys in their car.
The keys or the key fobs were left in the cars are left unlocked. So in almost, if I had to put a percentage on it, I would say, probably 96 to 98% of our cars that are entered and things are stolen from those cars are also left unlocked.
So there's no breaking, there's just entering.
Very few break-ins. The break-ins we see are sometimes at our parks.
Okay.
Much more rare than just people entering.
Still a crime that people are taking the cars, but 100% of those thefts could have been avoided had people not left their keys in the car.
Correct. So we see time and time with all of these, people are looking for that. They're moving on when the car is locked.
They get in, they push the button, if the car starts, they take it.
Correct.
Right.
And we've had situations where keys were found inside a car, and then keys were found inside that same car for the car sitting right next to it. Both cars were.
A twofer.
And those really take up a lot of our,
I know
a
it.
lot of our time.
Your annual.
My annual rant on car keys.
So patrol,
Clearly, it's not working.
the patrol function serves as the primary deterrent or prevention of crime. Uniformed officers in our marked cruisers that everybody sees on a daily basis. Our intent is for them to be highly visible in the community. That's why the cars are marked the way they are. That's why we're in the uniforms that we're in. And we have officers performing activities out in the public so people can see us. Their presence and visibility, visible activity in the community serves basically as the crux of our deterrent efforts. But second to that is our educational opportunities that we look for. Anything from patrol to community services to detectives to our SROs, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But all functions, all divisions of our department really look at the educational effort for crime deterrence. Another one of our core services and programs for the police department is emergencies. And what we're, I guess, commonly known for is responding to emergencies. Two of the most frequent ones that we go to are medicals and accidents. Medicals in 2019, we were just over 1,700 medical calls that we went on alone. That doesn't count the hundreds and hundreds of calls that the ambulance went on without us that were strictly for a transport from one health facility to another. But we responded to 1,700. We are first responders. That's 125 more than the year before. So over the course of the last 10 years, we've seen a steady rise in the number of medical calls that we go to. The accidents, it's been fairly consistent each year. We responded in 2019 to 564 accidents. And I wouldn't take a look at that as about 1.5 accidents a day, because that's generally not how it happens. So for instance, in January 2019, we had 53 accidents that we responded to. And there were 7 days during that month that we did not have an accident. There were 6 days where we responded to 3 accidents that day. January 23rd, in particular, we went to 7 accidents, and January 30th, we were at 5 accidents. So that's really kind of how it happens. It either happens in clusters or during storms, whatever it may be, but it's not sort of 1.5 a day, which seems to be much more manageable than how it actually happens. Mm-hmm. And an average accident that has no injury and or minor injury lasts about 30 or 40 minutes. From the time that we receive that call to the time that we're able to clear from that call. And that includes tow truck, that includes, taking care of somebody on scene, maybe a minor transport or show up of the ambulance for some services. But then we have the report itself, and the report itself takes officers anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes for a regular accident report. And so this isn't an accident report that has multiple cars or any extenuating circumstances, which we definitely do have. It doesn't include an accident that is a result of a DUI, which then you could tack on another 2 or 3 hours for that. So another core service is our roadway safety. Last year, there were over 2,000 documented traffic efforts by our officers, and that is sitting in a particular place, logging that in, that they're using radar or laser to reduce speed, they're looking at intersections, they're observing seatbelt violations or cell phone violations, or they're looking for those, and that's throughout town. We had 4,224 car stops last year. We conduct traffic studies to determine the volume of traffic on a road. Yes, sir.
Chief, looking at how much was collected from traffic tickets, it looks like the vast majority of those don't result in any fees or fines.
So most of those fees or fines do not come back to the town.
Oh, got it.
So there are only a handful that only a very small portion, $10, $15, $20 comes back.
I can tell you the check's not made out to the town of Simsbury. When I write them.
I can personally tell you.
I was going to ask how much of
Moving on.
that was Peterson.
So very little comes back to the town in the form of direct return on. And it's only for a certain few tickets. There are some speeding violations, reckless driving, and a few others.
Okay.
So we look to assess roadway markings, signage, seek to implement traffic calming strategies and other safety factors for our roads, our sidewalks, and for our trails. We also do traffic studies. So again, not just at the volume of cars, but the types of vehicles that are traveling on our roads, what time of day the peak volume is, and we try to work with that information with, definitely with our local traffic authority group, but also with the state to implement any changes that may be necessary. Another core service is our education, and our SROs provide a significant amount of our education every single day, and not just directly to students at our schools, but also to faculty, staff, and then through their extended contact with their families. They provide education, enforcement, support, and security for all the people who attend our schools, visit our schools. We have a police cadet program, which we've had for many, many years, and a large component of that is education. And again, not just reaching anywhere from 10 to 16 or so kids that are part of that program every year, but also to their families as well.
What's the interest level in that program right now? In the sense, is it capped at 15 or 16 that you can handle, and you have many more applicants, or?
Well, Lieutenant Several, do you know the numbers right now?
Right now, we have about 12 kids. There is no cap, but obviously, depending on how many advisors you have, you don't want to have 30 kids with
Sure.
one advisor. So I would say 15 is a good number.
Yeah, and it's continued, I mean, it's something that young folks are continuing to seek out from an interest level. That's
Correct.
great.
Actually, other towns, their cadet program has kind of gone away. We've taken on, for example, Avon. We've allowed Avon to come into our cadet program to help out and participate in it.
Nice.
Yeah, it kind of goes in waves, like the amount of interest. There was one time where it decreased significantly, and then the SROs and the advisors worked to get that back up. But it's been fairly consistent, a lot of interest, and they perform really well. So they do all sorts of things where every month they have meetings where they're learning or practicing some skills, and some of them choose to compete each year at the academy that they go to. There's a competition for a week. And they do
Have we ever had a graduate return to be a sworn officer for us?
For Simsbury, no. For example, when going back to when I was a school resource officer, I got an email last week from a gentleman who was one of our first explorers who just got hired by the state police. So, I mean, it's good when you hear someone who's gone through the program.
And one works for FEMA.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
And we take anybody, so they don't have to have an interest in being police officers. There's a lot of
We're gonna hold the line someplace.
volunteerism that we teach, involvement in your community.
Yeah.
It's a good reinforcement of
Right.
some strong beliefs.
Yeah.
So along with the cadet program, we also have the Citizens Police Academy, the Junior Police Academy, the use of social media for information about crimes, about laws, events, and services. And we host forums throughout the year. Some that you may have attended are related to animal services. We attend community events, and we provide security assessment of buildings, homes, businesses, and our parks. So anybody can call us up and say, can you come over and take a look at our house? And we have a whole multiple-page survey that we'll go through and explain to the homeowner what we make for recommendations, so both for businesses and for homes. And then finally, for this section, the quality of life. There are some other not-so-obvious services that we provide. For instance, we are really involved in our public gathering permits in that whole process, and looking at that from a public safety standpoint. So any event that happens that is required to have a public gathering permit, we're there, we're looking at those things. And our Community Services Division reviews all medical calls for anybody age 60 and over. So any type of medical call that comes through, the officers handle that, and then it goes to our Community Services Officer or the division, and they review that because then they may have to coordinate services with social services here in town or with protective services. And then we provide many other services and programs, such as the Project Lifesaver program, and that's still a very active program right now. We have 2 members of that for those people in our community who have a tendency to wander from their home or their caregivers. So many of these primary services originate in the dispatch center. And several of you have had opportunities to sit in dispatch and observe what happens in there. If you have not, you're more than welcome to, along with any ride-alongs with the police officers as well. But when fully staffed, there are 7 dispatchers in there. And the way that we work that schedule is there are 2 that are scheduled all the time on the day shift, and that's predominantly the busiest time for us, at least with the number of calls that are coming in and going out. And then we schedule 2 for the evening shift, but that only happens about 66% of the time as it's scheduled. And then 1 for the midnight shift. So then you add in all the vacations, trainings, sick, things like that. We don't quite have that perfect schedule, but that's how we have it set up now. With our E911 system, so anywhere in this area, if somebody calls 911, whether it's from a house phone or a cell phone, it's going to go here for us, whether it's for police, fire, or medical emergency. And our dispatchers handle all of that, and then they'll route the calls how they need to. Last year, we had 6,222 calls come in through the E911 system for us here.
Do we have the technology where you can call from a cell phone and they know where it is?
Yes.
We do?
Yeah,
Okay.
so yep, the system pops up. It's a statewide system, so everybody
Okay.
has the same system in Connecticut, but yes.
Okay,
Sometimes it works really well,
okay, because
Other
I knew
times-
there was,
other
yeah,
times
okay.
not so well.
It doesn't work so well on Route 10, but it works.
Okay, it'll work at my place.
So then the dispatch center also receives all of our routine calls. Unless somebody knows an actual number to dial in for a detective, for an administrator, somebody who has an actual phone, assigned to them. Dispatch will receive that. And we have approximately 40,000 of those calls a year that a dispatcher handles.
That include the bear calls?
Yep.
That includes the bear calls. Yep. Some of those are 911s and some of those are routine calls.
Yep.
So again, just like our accidents and several other things that we deal with, you can't spread these out over 365 days. You can't spread that out evenly over 3 shifts, and you can't spread that out evenly over 7 days of the week. So generally, this happens in clusters. So it's due to the nature of this work, the predictability of the workload is very difficult. It's difficult to do. So sometimes they are extremely busy, and where they may need some officers to come up to help, and other times it seems like they're catching up on some work because there is some freed up time. But they always have to listen to the radio. They're monitoring not just the police officers, they're monitoring Public Works, they're monitoring the ambulance, they're monitoring the fire department, and we have access to the school board radios as well. But one emergency situation can generate 1 call, or it can generate over 10 calls coming in. So if somebody witnesses or sees an accident, somebody needs some help, it's not just one 911 call that usually comes in, it's a bunch. So that dispatcher then has to juggle everything. So if they're handling a non-emergency phone call, or somebody walks into the front, to the window, that has to be put on hold, and they have to prioritize their calls. So at this point, I'm going to ask Lieutenant Tom Sheehan to provide a couple scenarios to sort of bring all these core services together, show you how they work. And then after him, Lieutenant Daskalakis will discuss the core services of animal control.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Sheehan. I am a lieutenant at the police department and currently oversee patrol. So when we talk about these core services, I'm going to just kind of highlight what we do and 2 of them that we see a lot of here. 2 of the kind of calls for service that we see a lot of. We're going to talk about a medical call first, or an aided call. As the chief had mentioned, that call starts with 911, and the dispatcher starts the call from there. All of our dispatchers are trained on emergency medical dispatch. And what that is, it's a flip chart, and it's a set of guidelines and principles that they have to go through to start triaging the call, to find out what the medical complaint is, and to find out all the basic information, where you are, a callback number. As they're getting all that at the same time, once they get it, they're now using our systems to dispatch police and ambulance simultaneously. If it's something that requires a fire department response, they do the initial dispatch on that as well. The whole time they're going to have this person on the phone while they're doing all this, so they've got a lot of multitasking going on. They also have to, with our computer-aided dispatch system, they have to maintain kind of a log of all these calls they're making and who they're calling and logging in what the medical complaint is about. Police are responding. Ambulance is responding. We're pretty fortunate out here that we always have a paramedic responding as well. All of the officers, we're generally there first before the ambulance, but there's times where they beat us to something. All of our officers are EMRs, emergency medical response trained. So we're not EMTs, but we're EMRs. We carry in our cruisers, we have a lot of medical equipment. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it. There's a large backpack that has masks, OB kits, bandaging supplies, the oxygen tank. We also have our AEDs, and every cruiser also has our Narcan. So they're bringing all that into the call. If we're there first, almost all medicals are a 2-person response. Based on what the call is dispatch will let us know if we're responding hot or if we're responding cold. Once they're inside there on their way in, based on the information they have, they're kind of assessing the scene safety when they show up. And they locate the subject, the patient, and they begin treatment. That treatment could be as simple as just calming someone down and talking to them and getting the chief complaint, or it could be that they're opening up an AED and starting to start CPR and all that right away before an ambulance response. Once ambulance and a medic arrive, we continue at the scene with them, kind of working under their direction. They are now the medical authority. They're higher trained than we are. And that could be as simple as us helping them get the stretcher out of the ambulance, or it could be, if it's a call that requires CPR, us assisting with that during the entire event. There has been times where, based on certain events, our officers have been tasked with actually driving the ambulance for them because the EMTs are busy inside. So it continues throughout the whole thing once they show up. While this is all going on, the officer is also doing kind of a quasi-investigation to make sure, well, okay, this is just presenting as medical, this is medical, there's nothing else that we need to be concerned about. If it's a situation that maybe a hoarding type situation or something else in the environment contributed to the medical, we know other services that we can get to respond with that, whether we have to reach out to social services, to the fire department for certain things, or there's been times we've even had the building and town guys come out to look at some structures. If family members are still there, we will assist the family members based on what is going on. If they need assistance in contacting other family members, if the person lives alone and there's pets there, we will kind of document that and make sure that we can make sure that the pets aren't going to be left alone for days on end. Someone can take over the house for them. At the conclusion of this, somebody goes to the hospital, ambulance goes, at the conclusion, the event isn't entirely done for us. Our officers then have to come back to the station. They're responsible for writing a report for the incident and documenting everything that they did. And depending on what it was, sometimes those reports get forwarded to social services based on the age of the patient. Sometimes they get forwarded to our detective division or our SROs based on what was going on. They also have to replenish everything they used in their cruiser. If they used Narcan, we have to replenish that. If we used our AED, that AED gets taken out of cycle because it needs to be downloaded, so we get a new one. Oxygen, if we use our oxygen, we have to replenish that. So the entire event isn't just showing up there and dealing with the scene. It then kind of continues throughout the rest of the shift so they can document everything. The second one I wanted to kind of talk about that we see a lot of, too many I think sometimes, is a domestic violence call. Same thing, these calls will start either with a 911 call, or a lot of times they start with somebody walking into the building for advice. However it starts at our communications level again with our dispatcher. So the dispatchers are the first contact with this. And they're, again, tasked with a large responsibility to gather a lot of this initial information to get out to the police, to the officers. So, they're getting caller's name, relationship to the offender, a victim's name, offender's name, the nature of the abuse, if there's any suspected injuries or known injuries, if there's any weapons involved or just implied, if there's children involved or present, if there's alcohol and drugs involved. This is all stuff, if this is a phone call, that they're trying to get on the phone call so that when we start heading there, we have as much information as we can when we get there. At the same time, they're kind of assessing the safety of this person on the call. They're trying to provide some advice if they're in a dangerous situation. Officers will get dispatched for any kind of domestic. It's a minimum of a 2-person dispatch, as well as a supervisor. So while they're en route, our dispatcher is still talking to these people on the phone. They're gathering more information, and they're putting that out over the radio to us. If we know there's an injury there prior to us getting there, they're going through the same thing with the medical now. They're also getting an ambulance headed that way. They're going to start accessing some of the state computer databases for orders of protection, for firearms, for wants and warrants. And again, all this is documented in the CAD. So there's a lot of multitasking going on there before they have even hung up the phone. Patrol responds. As I said, it's minimum of 2 officers plus a supervisor. When they get there, they again are going to assess the situation and what they have. Once they're there, the standard procedure is you kind of separate people. You identify who everyone is, who is our victim, who is our possible offender, are there any potential witnesses there? And a lot of times, this may not be what was initially reported. Once everyone is separated and we start getting some details, a lot of times this is just an overreaction. A neighbor heard a couple arguing and thought it was a full-blown domestic, and it wasn't. So in that case, there's no probable cause to really do anything further, but our people will still take the time to kind of mediate through that. If there's any services that we can refer to or inform them of, we take the time to go through all of that. If this is something that is more serious and it looks like there may be a probable cause developed to make an arrest, then that's the route we go. When they start doing that, we're gonna confirm if there's any previous history with these individuals after we've identified everybody. That includes orders of protection and if there's any conditions of release or anything like that. If an arrest is made, that person is now in custody. He's on his way back here. While that person is on their way back here, officers are still with our victim and providing support to them. Our goal is to obtain statements, a written statement from a victim, from any witnesses that we've identified. And they're going to document the conditions that they see. They're going to document the entire scene. That includes possibly taking photographs. If it's a large-scale event, it may require a detective response, which would be, off hours would be a call-in. One of the most important things we do for a victim, I think, is we provide services to them, or the ability for them to get services. So part of that is we ensure that that they have contact with the local domestic violence service provider, and we participate in what's called a LAP, lethality assessment, which is a questionnaire that we go through, and if they reach a certain criteria, they're able to reach out to someone to make sure they have kind of a contract for safety or a plan of safety moving forward. We explain to the victim and provide them details on the arrest process for the subject. As far as an arraignment, it's always a next day arraignment or next court day arraignment, the bond, and their ability to meet with the family violence victim advocate. If there's children that are involved or witnessed, we try to arrange for them, they're able to do what we call a forensic interview, or eligible for it if they witnessed an event that could be considered traumatic. On the day of the event, just the basic details are provided to the parent of the children to explain that process to them. The next day would be a follow-up from our detective division to reach out to that family and to arrange the forensic interview. Those occur in Hartford. So based on the seriousness of the incident, if it required a detective call-in, then they would call in, they would come in, respond, and they can start working some of that immediately at that scene. So once we clear the scene, we've provided services to the victim. The offender is already here at the station. The booking process requires 2 officers as well. That would be a uniform arrest report is done, the fingerprinting, the photographing, the bond. All of that is done here in-house. And we would also issue a temporary order of protection, which is issued that night, that day. Once that's all done, we've done that, we've taken care of our victim, we have processed our offender. The officer now has to write an extremely detailed report detailing everything that has happened. So that includes the case report itself for the event, the temporary protective order, our bond forms, our family violence forms, and our DCF referrals if they're needed based on children being there. So it's a lengthy process, and any other officer that responded and took part in that would also have to write a report, because if we're separating victim and offender, it's 2 different officers that are going to be talking to them. So there's a couple of reports that come in from that. So it's the purpose of telling you these stories and going through is none of that was like incident specific, and not all of that happens for every single one we go to, but it happens on some level. It may be very quick. My scene assessment is okay. This is just an argument. I don't need a bunch of people here. Or, oh boy, I need more people here. We've got a lot to do. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Lieutenant Sifidaskalakis.
Yes, good morning, Morris. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm Fred Sifidaskalakis. I'm also lieutenant with the police department. And I have the privilege of going over one of our services that I'd like to talk to you about, is our animal control. When we think of animal control, I know the first thing that comes to your mind is Mark Rudowitz. Mark does such a great job for the community and for the town of Simsbury that I probably can't speak enough about what kind of job I think Mark does. It's just such an excellent job. But I want to explain to you some of the things that, as a police department, we do, as well as Mark Rudowitz. In 2019, the police department alone took over 932 animal complaints. These animal complaints could range from a dog Chris Bears and Sean Bears, to coyotes. As Tom said, these could be something simple as we go to the neighborhood and check for a bear that could be up a tree, to someone who may have gotten bit by a dog, someone who may have been, chased by a dog. These are these type of complaints that the police department and Mark are handling. But they're not just domestic animals. We're also dealing with non-domesticated animals. A couple examples that I found this past year in 2019 was on Summit Ridge, we rescued an African gray parrot from the woods, to Mark removing a 6-foot black snake out of a resident's
Ew.
grill. So,
Real?
they range, these animal complaints could range from anything from a dog all the way from a 6-foot snake inside someone's grill.
Was the grill on?
No, thank goodness.
Oh, God.
Thank goodness it was
That's why
not.
it was black.
I mean, is that what it, there's two ways to get rid of it.
So those are some types of calls that we handle from domestic to non-domesticated. Some education things and information that we provide. We provide numerous presentations to the public on bears and coyotes. We're privileged, like I said, about Mark. Mark is considered an expert. He's such an expert that we get calls from Weathersfield, Southington, Rocky Hill, where he has gone out to those communities as well and spoke on behalf of wildlife. We're fortunate enough to have, him being an instructor for for animal handling, and he has taught many officers in different academies, from Hartford to Waterbury Academy to Bryn, even our own post academy, of what is needed to be done for wildlife. We also, besides that, with ACO license certifications, we have someone who's a nuisance wildlife control operator, to the state of Connecticut licensed trapper. He has canine training. He's certified in pet emergency care. So there's much more involved when it comes to animal control than just us going out and looking for animals. I mean, we have, besides the training, Mark has much more training than that. Public health, he also does much more response as far as rabies vaccinations and compliances. We have microchip clinics. We have dog licenses, compliance, and surveys. For those of you who don't know, we are one of 9 towns in the state of Connecticut when it comes to our surveys for animal control for dog licensing. That Mark made over 300 phone calls to make sure that we keep up with this, to a point where he actually goes out there in a year, and I asked him this the other day, he went out and knocked on 1,334 doors to make sure that the town of Simsbury is compliant, to save 10% off license fees for the town. So he does all these things, for the support of the community.
Lieutenant, I'm just going to add quickly, particularly for our new board members. I know we've mentioned this in the past, but the annual canvass is actually a state statute. It is a requirement that towns are supposed to physically go to 20% of the properties on an annual basis, with the theory that about once every 5 years, you're physically going to a home to learn if there is a dog living there. So a lot of times that's when we discover perhaps that there is an unlicensed dog, or maybe that the dog is out of date with the rabies vaccination. It is a statutory requirement, but it is so time consuming that, as the lieutenant mentioned, there's very, very few communities that actually comply with that. So I think it's just a testament to how, efficient Mark is, that he is getting that done within all of his other duties and responsibilities. It's really quite an accomplishment.
Correct. It's also the dedication of the department to continue this, to make sure it gets done, because of, like Maria said, we're one of 9, even though it's a state requirement. Not many towns are able to comply with this.
Yeah.
As you know, we have a dog park. In 2019, Mark spent over 117 calls for service down there, just by, even if it's just going down there and get out of his car or his truck, talking to residents, playing with the animals, just being involved in the community, going down to make sure it's a safe area for everybody to have fun with their animals. One last thing I want to talk about too is things that, one member that Mark does is, Mark is a member of the Senator Witkos's Wildlife Management Working Group. Mark is an expert. He's testified in front of the state capitol. I don't think we realize that, how good is of the person that we have working for our town. The chief mentioned, we're budgeted for a little over $75,000 for the service. I can't explain enough what he does and what the department does when it comes to making this community safe when it comes to animals. I mean, bear calls alone were over 300-something calls last year just for bears alone. Most towns don't even send officers to these type of calls because they figure that they're animals, it's wildlife. Simsbury, we will send an officer or an animal control officer to every bear call. So if you call us, we respond to the bears. So that's something that we do. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Luke, does Officer Rudowitz, he also enforcement for neglect and abuse, correct?
Correct.
And then does he do if there's prosecution, he's the.
Depending on what it is, he could make an arrest.
Yeah.
We could also help him by making the arrest too.
It's curious of how the enforcement
But he
occurs.
could-
He has
he could
full power,
also-
sworn power, as much as another one of his peers in the department to make an arrest?
Not the same as a police officer, no.
Okay.
But there are certain charges he can, depending on what they are involving animals. Like he cannot go out and arrest somebody for an assault or a domestic violence related incident, but cruelty to animals, barking dog type stuff, yes.
And if we have a stray, do we use the facility in Avon?
We do.
For
We do.
dogs lost, that's where they go?
They go to
Right,
Cherry Brook,
okay.
yes.
And is that a shared services? Do we have some sort of is that a courtesy that they provide to us to an extent, as accommodation? Or do we have to pay for if a dog gets housed there or cat gets housed there?
It depends.
Depends, yeah.
Mark does such a great job that
Maybe just taken care of?
we've kind of
Yeah.
We've been lucky.
worked out a good deal.
Usually Facebook solves it pretty quick, right, for the most part?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
social media has definitely helped a lot now
Yeah.
with finding owners of animals because it's much faster than,
It's actually a very nice facility over there.
Yeah. Generally, you guys take a picture downstairs of whoever's dog is missing, right, and Mark brings them over pretty quick, or they come in.
correct?
Yeah, so we're not quick to jump to take them to the pound. Usually end up coming back here. The dispatchers look to see where the registered dogs are of that breed, make a bunch of phone calls. Most of those are resolved that way.
Luckily, we have ways to get to licensing and look at the software to see where the animals come from.
Right.
Sometimes they don't have their license on them. So our dispatchers will actually look, okay, who owns a yellow lab up on Cobb Hill Way? They'll go to Cobb Hill Way to see, okay, who owns yellow lab? Okay, maybe it comes back to this address. Then we will call the owner or call the home that we think it may come back to. They may say, nope, it's not mine, but you know what says yellow lab? It's so-and-so. So it just works. It works.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks. I think everybody knows them, but just in case you don't, I'm sorry. Lieutenant Sifo is our administrative commander, and Lieutenant Sheehan is our patrol commander. I apologize if I didn't do a good introduction. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. So our last of the core services and programs is emergency management, and as I said earlier, this does not involve any personnel. It's strictly a way to fund our town emergency notification system, and then there's funds in there every year for other needs, and I coordinate that with our designated EMD, the emergency management director in the town, whether it's something for our LED trailer or some component to our emergency system, something with the EOC. That's what that budget is for. Okay, so areas of focus. Basically, this budget is to maintain and preserve our current services that we have, our current equipment, and our current resources. Specifically for equipment, some examples is this includes our fleet of vehicles, our variable message signs, we have 2 of those, our radar trailer, our radars and laser devices, personal protective equipment, we have a vast array of that, our duty gear, our tools, ammunition, crime scene processing material, medical supplies, and much, much more equipment. Our resources, I would consider that such things as training, certification, and our accreditation. But this budget allows us to continue those, as well as our professional development. It doesn't allow us to necessarily get to the level that we want to with our professional development, and there's a bunch of components on why, but it's because of our staffing and of our overtime funding. So I think we're slowly making our way towards where we would like to be with that. As far as the highlights, But just under $110,000 increase in the full-time salaries. These are due to general wage increases and the contractual step increases. And as you can see there, where the step increases were throughout the organization. Also a $25,000 increase in police overtime, the second of 3 planned increases over the course of 3 years. And as it says, they're due to historical spending. So we've been able to show that our overtime has been over what we have budgeted or what we need, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The $5,000 reallocation from police holiday pay to overtime training. So we saw the need to increase our overtime that is as a result of some of our training, and we try to work as best as we can to try to work in that training on regular time, but sometimes it's just not possible. We have to fill a shift if somebody is removed to go to training. So we ended up using some of the allocated holiday pay. So historically, over the last 5 years or so, we do not expend 100% of that holiday pay account because the police officers have the option of taking vacation day in lieu of actually getting paid for a holiday. So some officers choose to do that, so it leaves some money left in there. And this is a roughly 95% funded account now, doing that $5,000 reallocation. So that's, I think that's a very, very comfortable and smart move. More budget highlights. $4,250 increase in conferences and education, and that's primarily due to an increase in the cost for tuition to our police academy. So we're expecting to have to send 2 new officers to the academy in next fiscal year, and that tuition went up. We actually received a letter about a month ago saying it went up from $2,000 to $3,800 strictly for tuition alone for officers or for recruits to go to the academy. $10,000 decrease in dispatch overtime. So if you recall, this current year, we had increased the overtime in dispatch due to a planned medical leave. In addition to that, we had unplanned other leave, significant leave, so that planning did help. So there was a $10,000 decrease for next year, and then also almost a $7,200 increase in the police contractual services for promotional testing. So we have exams that we do as a as-need basis for moving to the next step of sergeant or lieutenant, and those expire this May. So for trends and challenges, we have all seen the growth throughout town, and I think Mike Liddon did a great job at emphasizing that earlier today. Developments within the last couple of years have put additional stress on the police department. For example, the number of medical calls continues to rise. So we saw a large increase a couple years ago when the urgent care opened up. When that closed, we saw a slight decline. It didn't really match the incline for some reason. So I think that, for many reasons, we're going to keep seeing those numbers go up and up. And then obviously with the continued development of areas such as the north end of town, I fully expect that this trend of additional stress on the police department will continue. And so what does that additional stress actually mean for the police department? It means slower response times, not necessarily for emergencies. We've been able to manage responding to emergencies in a very timely manner, but more so for those non-emergencies. So people will be waiting a little bit longer for us to get to those non-emergencies. It means less time officers have for proactive patrol, to drive through our neighborhoods, our businesses, our schools, our parks. And it means less time to detect and deter crime and a longer period to actually investigate crime. So for example, Big Y alone is expected to increase traffic and draw more people to that area. From a public safety standpoint, unfortunately that means car accidents, both on the roadway and in the parking lot. It means medical calls, it means shoplifting, it means additional patrols of the building, and not just when that building is open, but all hours of the day. It means additional lockouts, suspicious activity, all sorts of things for us. So that's the type of additional stress that I'm talking about when we do have growth, whether it's commercial growth or just residential growth. Let's see. So as you're aware, and we talked about earlier, we're going to continue to talk about people breaking into cars, or entering cars, I should say, and stealing cars. Yeah. So we're in the fourth year of this trend, and we're doing all that we can to try to stop that, but it's a significant trend and a challenge for us. And then just in general, our other investigations, I've been doing police work for 27 years, and what was once a very simple investigation is now extremely complex, no matter what it is. So, I have one example of just technology in general, so the continued advancement of technology, crimes that are being committed using technology. That means that we have to then try to keep up with that, and we never can. It's not necessarily a matter of us being able to buy new equipment. It just constantly changes. So now we're learning what they're doing in order to commit this crime. Whether it's looking for somebody connecting on a home Wi-Fi with their cell phone, as they're trying to break in, trying to figure out all sorts of stuff. These simple investigations have really moved into very lengthy investigations. And I believe over the years, our standard has definitely increased. I mean, we're looking to find out as much information as we can to try to service our community as best we can. So they're becoming very, very complex. It's not just the fraud investigations, it's basically all. Traffic safety is always a challenge for law enforcement, but more so for our department over the last few years. Our ability to be proactive and reactive for some aspects of traffic enforcement has diminished. And this is just for a variety of reasons. We've had a lot of absences in the department. We've had a lot of vacancies and a lot of extended leaves. So we haven't been able to staff a traffic enforcement officer whose primary focus was to respond to the people who call in. And we get hundreds of calls a year. Several times a week we have people call and ask if we can sit on their street, check for speeding, whatever it may be. And that officer used to do that on a regular basis. And so now it's left up to the patrol officers who are out there responding to calls and who are also patrolling their districts. And so now they have this additional responsibility to try to tackle these complaints. And so we're able to initially respond to all of these, and we do, but other needs prevent us from being there on a consistent basis, and it really affects the efficacy of being there and what we're trying to do. So another trend and challenge is our staffing levels, which I touched on. We're authorized for 38 sworn officers, and we have now for a few years, but we're consistently well below that. So for the first 7 months of this current fiscal year, we have averaged 6 officers on leave every month for at least 2 weeks or longer. So in reality, it's like we're working with a sworn number of 32 instead of 38 to try to get the same amount of work done. So most of that leave is non-work-related injury or police vacancies. And it does not include all of our reassignment for training that officers have to go through. Most of the officers on leave are assigned to the patrol division, so that adds another element to us because we have minimum numbers for patrol. There are 3 officers at an absolute minimum on the first shift and the second shift, in addition to 1 sergeant. So if that person is missing, now it's going to cost us in overtime. We have to replace that. So with those low numbers, overtime is not the only concern. We have to consider the availability of officers to work. Is there a large enough pool of officers to meet the needs? And we need to consider also officer burnout. Working so many hours or inconsistent shift really puts a toll on an employee. Moving on to administration. Administration and supervision at all levels in the department has always been a challenge. Over the years and decades, we made some significant improvements. For instance, less than 2 decades ago, we made it mandatory that each shift was going to be supervised by a sergeant. Before that, it was not. Our administrative workloads have all increased, such as accreditation, our involvement with public gathering permits, community development and engagement, professional development of all members, purchasing studies, all sorts of stuff. And we've had the same number of administrators to perform that same work for as long as I can remember. So well over 25 plus years, while the department numbers have grown and the challenges have grown. So the challenge is not that we need, the challenge is that we need adequate time and expertise and development opportunities to continue to succeed. So one just real quick example is Lieutenant Sheehan is our patrol commander, and Lieutenant Siffel held that position for 8 years, almost 9 years before Lieutenant Sheehan. And as a patrol commander, really your primary responsibility is oversight of the patrol and dispatch function. And for as long as I can remember, we've never been able to come in, or a patrol commander's never been able to come in and say, let's see what happened over the last 16 hours while I was gone, or let's see what happened Monday over the last 2 days, because there's always projects and always other things that are happening. So, I attribute some of that to some of the challenges that we have had over the last year, so that lack of organizational and function supervision. And this requires personnel and funding. So jumping right in then to overtime, much of our overtime costs are due to the replacement of officers on leave. Some of the overtime is to fund investigations or calls for service. So one example is somebody has to respond to a car accident toward the very end of their shift. It doesn't make any sense for them to leave. Obviously, they're not going to leave the accident scene without somebody being there and then be replaced. There has to be some continuity there, so the officer will stay at that accident. And that happens quite frequently. Over the course of a year, those extra hour or two that somebody is held over really starts to add up and cost us in overtime. Investigations that are more serious in nature require members to stay past their shift, or they get called back into work, or they work on their days off. Other activities are funded through overtime as well, such as attendance at some community events, such as parades, or for some of our programs like the cadets, the CPA, and the JPA that we talked about earlier. I want us to be able to attend more community events and to get more officers involved. Somebody had commented earlier today that they don't know many of our officers. They didn't realize there were 38, that they only know a handful, and they thought our numbers were down that low. There are opportunities that we have missed due to overtime and staffing concerns. There have been health and wellness fairs that we have not gone to, recruitment events, which is becoming very difficult for us, recruitment, and community meetings that we feel that we could be at, and it would be a benefit for the service that we provide. In the fall of 2018, I implemented monthly staff meetings with the sergeants at administration, and these are detrimental for sharing information, for problem solving and accountability. But these come at a cost of about $16,000 a year in order to have all of our sergeants together, because they're working other shifts or they're on their day off. We also implemented that we're investigating all responses to aggression. So whenever our officers use force, we're going to have that investigated. In some cases, it may be investigated by a sergeant, but other cases, it's going to require the call-out of our two lieutenants, the administrators, and that could be after their hours, could be weekends. And then there were numerous other activities that the current administrators attend outside their normal hours, such as government or community meetings that affect that overtime as well. Okay, so we're going to jump right into then the CNR projects, and Lieutenant Sheehan is going to address the first two, and then Lieutenant Sifo will address the last three.
So the first one up there is the police cruiser replacement of 3 Explorers. So this is to replace vehicles that are going to be sold or replaced due to high mileage, dependability issues. Those are line cars. Those are all the cars we buy new like that always start as a line car, meaning it's responding to emergencies. As they start to age with mileage, or sometimes we just get one that is always at the dealership for something, we cycle them out. Sometimes they cycle into the SRO cars because those don't get as much mileage, or the CSO car, or even we take all the decals off and make it a detective vehicle. But we've got several that are, we have one of our cruisers has 86,000 miles now, and the biggest thing to remember about these cars is it's not the, these are not the Ford Explorers that you go down to Sealer Ford and pick up for yourself. These are, Tom Roy referred to them, they're called PPVs, police pursuit vehicles. That doesn't mean they're geared up to just go on pursuits. It's a designation that the car manufacturers gave to emergency response vehicles. It's got a little beefier alternator, a little beefier engine block, things like that. So the biggest thing with when we worked with the mechanics, Tom Roy's guys at Highway, the biggest thing with these vehicles is they are running all the time. When they are a district car, they're assigned to an officer from each district, from each shift, A, B, and C. And it's running all day, pretty much. And there's a reason for that. It's not because the guys want to just keep their AC on so that the car is nice and cool when they get in it, or the heat on. All that equipment that I talked about that we use for medicals, the oxygen, the AED, the Narcan, those are required to be kept in between a certain temperature range. So if an officer is in the building writing his report from one of those calls that he was on, and it's snowing out, he can't shut his car off for an hour or half hour while he's writing a report and let it cover with snow and let the temperature drop to a certain degree, because all that equipment that's in there needs to be maintained at a certain level. So the cars are generally running a long time. The biggest thing with that is, like I said, Tom's guys helped us out with this through Ford, is the engine hours. So whereas a car may have 75,000 road miles on it, it generally runs probably 6 hours of every shift, maybe 2 hours of downtime. And when that thing is running like that, Ford equates an hour of idle time of just sitting there to 33 miles of wear and tear on an engine. So one or two of our 75,000 mile cars, in reality, that comes out to over 300,000 miles on a vehicle. So that's a big thing to consider with these. So that's what those three are all for line cruisers that will be out responding to emergency calls. The second one there, the supervisor cruisers.
Sorry, Lieutenant, sorry. So you said 85,000, 86,000 miles?
So we have one, our highest line car right now has 86,000 miles on
And
it.
how old is it?
That is a 2017.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God.
That helps more perspective.
Yeah, sorry. So we don't have, none of our line cruisers are older than 2017 right now. And we generally run an average of about 26,000 miles a year per car. And then we get a longer time span out of them when we cycle them down to detective cars or to the SRO car, because they're not responding to calls like a patrol car is.
But the 3 is the normal cadence we've been on for at least the last decade, right?
Yeah, yes, sir.
If I could just very, very quickly on this. So the police cruisers, I think if I recall the discussion with the Board of Finance, with moving it to the operating budget as opposed to the 5-year payback method, something that Amy and Melissa and I had pointed out to them is that the average life cycle of a patrol cruiser is 3 years. And so when we were using the 5-year payback method, we were essentially paying for the cruiser longer than it was actually in active use. So I think that was part of the rationale, if I recall, for moving it over to operating.
But it's not an operating.
So it shows up in operating, but then it's a budgeting transfer to CNR. But it's not part of the 416 payback anymore.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks.
So the second part up there, the supervisor cruisers, 2 Tahoes. We currently don't have any Tahoes, and everything is the Police Explorer. And we feel there's a need for the Tahoe. It's a larger vehicle, and our supervisors' vehicles, we have 2 designated as supervisor vehicles that respond with the guys on the road. They're equipped with more items than the regular line cars, based on the nature that it's the supervisor's car. There's items in there that it's not practical to keep in every line car we have, so we keep them in those knowing it's the supervisor, he's gonna go to the call. So, I apologize, sorry. And there's other things that the supervisors are required to have use, that we don't keep in the car that are back here at the station, because it's not practical to keep those, again, in everybody's car. So we feel the larger vehicle like this would be valuable for us to maintain the supervisor not having to come back here, and still being able to make it to all of these calls to get to. That requested amount will outfit 2 of the Tahoe PPVs, and it will replace the 2 supervisors' cars that we currently have on the line right now.
That's coming out of private duty.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Just like to add on that, price went up, so I think we're at 130,000 this current year. So the new model came out,
Yeah.
2020 models, and it's a lot more expensive. And they also changed, like these manufacturers do every few years, they changed the inside of the cars, so we can't use the current prisoner cell system that we have. You have to buy.
Oh, great.
That's the reason.
This is for the
Patrol cars.
patrol cars.
That's for the regular patrol cars. The supervisor's cars at this point will not have that equipment
Yeah,
inside.
okay.
Say 50, I mean, again, the 110 looks like a big number, but 55 grand for 2 Tahoes is not a bad deal when you think about how much Tahoes cost.
It's not just a Tahoe either, that's for
Yeah,
all
it's all
the
the
equipment,
equip- yeah.
everything, lights,
Yeah.
everything that goes inside it.
Yeah, I wish I could get that deal on a Tahoe, that's a.
And you'll have the new livery scheme on it that, or what do you call it, not livery, but what's it called?
Decals?
The new, right,
Yes.
okay.
I'm gonna talk about the next three items on CNR. The first one I'm gonna talk about are the MDT computers. MDT are the mobile data terminal computers. Those are computers you see in each police cruiser, where they can run license plates, registrations, check for insurance, operator's license, do police reports. So much they could do with them. Well, what we don't realize is these were purchased in the 2012, 2013 budget. So as many of you know, when it comes to computers, a computer that is 78 years old is pretty much at its end of life. We have gotten the most we can out of these computers. These are a vital piece of equipment for the officers who are working on the road. The MDTs allow officers to run criminal checks, connect to the department computer system, and exchange sensitive and confidential information between police cruisers or police cruiser and the communications center. The presence of the computer in the police cruiser also allows the officer to stay in the field. Like Tom was saying earlier, they have to come back here and do reports. That's because sometimes MDTs are down. They can't do the reports out on the road. So if we have, 3 officers working and you may see them parked in a parking lot, most of the time they could be working on their police reports. And then they can automatically send those reports into the police department electronically through the computer system. What we're finding now are not only the computers breaking down, but the screens, the keyboards, they're breaking. And unfortunately, we're at the point now where obviously there's no more warranty. So as they break, it's going to cost us hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to replace those pieces as we go along. What Tom talked about, the new cruisers coming, if you look at the Chevy Tahoe and the Ford Explorer, Ford and Chevy both have redone their police packages. They are a bigger vehicle now, so the computer stuff we have now are mounts that will no longer fit in a new cruiser. So as we buy new cars, I would have to buy new mounts anyways. So part of this is also include replacing the mounts as we get new cars. What's nice too is working with different computer companies is they will take our old MDTs and trade them in for something. So the price you see there includes a trade-in for the MDTs.
Nice.
The next is the soft body armor. As you can see, looking at Tom and the chief and me, all of us, are wearing the most important piece of our equipment, and that's our bulletproof vest. This coming fiscal year, we're going to have 21 officers whose vests have come to the end of life, which is 5 years. 5 years is the National Institute of Justice, and the NIJ is recommendation of you need to replace them. Heat, sweat, they get wet, they get cold, they start to wear down. The protection is not as good as it was when we first got them. So every 5 years, they say replace the vest.
Do you guys, are there recycle programs for those to go to less well-funded departments and such, or do they destroy them?
We do not give them to other departments now.
Also, when you give it back to do you
We'll either destroy
do
them.
you destroy them
or we use
yourselves, or
them
do you
for-
send
we
them to the
use
manufacturer and
we
they take?
destroy them ourselves, or we'll use them for training.
Okay.
There's things we can do to test them too. Soft powder,
don't wanna
as
know
I said,
about that.
infuriates.
Theirs?
You gotta make sure that our officers are protected.
Peanut butter?
And what's nice is, we put in for a grant last year. I was telling the chief today, I checked because I know I haven't got an email yet. I know Maria hasn't got an email yet. We did receive the grant. It's just I haven't been officially notified. But if I go online and I look at the actual bulletproof vest grant, it shows for next year that we did receive a grant. So that will help with some of this funding.
I imagine that one will make it to the top of our list. I wouldn't, I'm not going to speak for the Board of Finance, but I think we'll pay for that one.
The next is the AFIS machine. The AFIS stands for the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. Our current system, we have 2 AFIS machines. One is in booking we use for criminal, and one is in the lobby we use for non-criminal civilian fingerprinting. The state notified us last year that they will be updating the criminal AFIS machine, meaning they will purchase one machine for each police department for the criminal part of it. They will not replace the civilian part where we do fingerprints. And in 2019 alone, we did 700 non-criminal fingerprints. So we use a machine daily, especially on Thursdays when we help the Board of Ed out and do anywhere from 7 to 15 Board of Ed prints that we do every week.
Teachers, the subs, anybody that's going to
Correct.
school.
Anybody that
right?
goes into the Board of Ed, we fingerprint for the Board of Ed.
Is there reimbursement for that?
For,
Is there any money that exchanges hands when someone comes for
when
those
someone comes
kinds
in
of-
to be fingerprinted, we
Yeah.
charge $5
Okay.
to be fingerprinted,
Gotcha.
which is a pretty low amount when you compare it to other towns, what they're charging for fingerprinting.
Little background.
Um,
It's all in plan.
These machines were purchased in 2013, and it becomes, having a second machine it makes it more efficient and clean means of the old style fingerprinting, when you just take the black ink out, and you would roll each finger, then you have to have them wash it with special sanitizer to get the ink off, and it's much messier when you're doing it that way. This is the right time, and it's also the right time to replace the old system, as the state is already changing out the criminal machine. The machine has also reached its life expectancy. We bought these in 2013. Again, they're computers. It's 2020. So these computers break, they're out of warranty. Unfortunately, parts are becoming harder and harder to get. Therefore, once this one breaks, this could be the end of using this machine. The cost that you see up there also includes the workstation, the shipping, installation, the training, and the first 3 years of maintenance as well.
Nice.
So that will include the maintenance contract for 3 years.
Okay.
Questions? No?
Thank you.
Makes sense.
Thank you, Fred. So as far as service improvements, so looking for deputy chief's position and to upgrade one sergeant position to lieutenant. And I'll kind of wrap these together. I think it's very important to improve our oversight, our supervision, and our productivity. As I mentioned earlier, that one part of the police department has not expanded in at least 25 years, if not a lot longer than that. So there are 3 people in administration right now that are sworn, the 2 lieutenants and me. I think that the improvement of oversight, supervision, and productivity will provide consistency to supervision across the divisions, the functions, and the shifts. It will reduce the current workload on individual administrators, which will then result in more productivity. And one example is we have a guardian tracking system that we purchased last year, and it kind of serves many purposes, but it's basically for personnel. So it's an early warning system for us, so if somebody uses force in a response to aggression, or somebody goes to a very difficult event that may be traumatizing for them, there's a way for us to keep track of that and have red flags pop up, so we take a look and make sure. So if somebody uses use of force maybe 4 times is what, maybe we set that flag up in 6 months, then it sends a message to us to look at this, see what's going on. It also acts as a means to document personnel items such as praise and counseling. So we bought that last year. We've not been able to get it up and running yet. So that's where the productivity comes in, because there are other things to get done that really that are prioritized. It will increase the available time for coaching, mentoring, teaching, and involvement. I think it's very important that there seems to be, just because of the positions within a police department, a very clear separation between those who are on the ground with the boots than those who are inside or those who are with administration. So it's important to be able to foster those relationships. Also increase the available time for administrators to get out in the community. So I constantly hear, we don't see you, where are you? I don't get out, the lieutenants don't get out. It would be nice to frequent a lot of things that are happening, especially at the senior center. We get those requests all the time, and it's just difficult to break away. And I think it really it really matters. It really matters to us because we're able to connect with people. They're able to tell us what is going on in their life. We're able to see a different perspective than just seeing what's coming across the computer. These positions will help us divide up the duty officer status. So what we have is, after hours, we have a lieutenant who is assigned as the duty officer, and they're assigned for a week. So if anything major happens, if a notification needs to be made beyond sergeant, they will notify one of the lieutenants, and right now it's every single week. And I know Lieutenant Sifo has had this now every other week since 2010. So, adding another one or two into that mix will release a little bit of that just built up weight on the shoulders of the administrators. It will also help us with a dedicated social media administrator. So right now that's me, and it has been since 2008, and it really needs to be elsewhere than with me.
You do a really good job at it, though.
For crimes analysis, so right now when we start to see a trend in crime, we're running around and we're looking at it and trying to figure it out. We'll be able to assign somebody. We're talking about another lieutenant who's in charge of professional standards, and we'll have crimes analysis. We have some software that sort of works. Rick is working on upgrading that for us, so it'll work better the way that it's designed to work. And we will have somebody then assigned to crimes analysis, so we're constantly keeping track of what is happening. And then projects. So, this is a good example of what we've been working on this year with the radio system. It took a lot of work to put together the information for the radio system. Even last year, putting together that study, Lieutenant Sifo and Melissa did a huge portion of that, and so that was carved out of their regular time. We really need to look at and update our directive system. Instead of doing it in blocks every 10 years or so, that should be something that's done on a regular basis. When we have equipment that it comes in and gets replaced, that's a whole process. So the MDTs that hopefully we'll get next fiscal year, the APHIS machine, it's not a matter of plug it in and then everybody knows how to use it. There's a whole coordination of that needs to be done by somebody at an administrator level. And then implementation of new procedures, whether they come from the court, they come from us, whatever it may be. So another reason for this is to flatten the organization. So I think a more flattened organization, it's more adaptable. So there's less bureaucracy within the department. Not everything has to flow all the way to the top. There's going to be some more responsibility and accountability at a lower level. We'll get more things done. And then also there's more collaboration. There's more managers on a level playing field. So I think it sparks a little bit more cooperation there. Also, an improved succession plan. So it allows for the development of members at various levels for temporary or permanent replacement at the next level. It's preparation and planning for the next step in the member's career. It will reduce the learning curve with a new position, and it allows members a different perspective. So oftentimes we'll try to send somebody to like a first-line supervisor course. And right now they're an officer, but they're going to this first-line supervisor course. They come back and they always say, wow, there's a different perspective now. I can understand why these things happen. So if we prepare people for this, they may have a larger view on why things are done, greater insight. And then I think there's also greater opportunities for training. So sometimes with police training, due to a position somebody holds, a rank, they may not be able to get into certain training. So we have another opportunity for another lieutenant and another opportunity for a deputy chief to be able to attend some training. This model mimics a lot of other models and a lot of other agencies around us that I think are very successful models. And some examples are South Windsor, Farmington, Berlin, Bloomfield, Southington, and Glastonbury all have very similar structures for their administration. I think that this plan would also allow us greater commitment to accreditation. So I think we've done a fantastic job with accreditation, starting in the early 2000s. I think it was 2003 with state accreditation. We went through that process. Then we signed on in 2008 with the national accreditation, and we've done really, really well through there. But what I think we should be doing is having a greater commitment to that, quicker changes to best practices. So what accreditation is all about is these are the best practices that we're seeing nationwide. They get that, it's usually old at that point. It then comes to us, and we have a year to get to that. So now that information could be 1 or 2 years old, and now we're implementing that. And, with other things that are happening, it may take us a while. So with another structure, we may have a better chance at getting best practices up and running much quicker than we have been able to. That's all I have for you today.
So Chief, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate the thought and depth that you went into that. As we talk about improving this portion of the organization, heard a lot about overtime, and we have in the vacancies, et cetera. What about the other half of the organization? Because we're not going, the proposed staffing plan doesn't go up from the 26 on patrol, right? So we still aren't.
Correct.
And again, I'm not pitting one against the other, but we still have the challenge of, do we have enough officers on the front line?
Right.
As well, and again, maybe I'm asking you to forecast this and it's a hard question, but
Yep.
are we gonna do that in the next 5 years, 2 years? I mean, what's your vision for that?
Yeah, so definitely a significant challenge. If you look at officers per capita,
Right.
the number of officers per residence, for our comparative towns, it's almost 1.8. 1.8 officers per 1,000 residents, and we are at 1.5. So in order for us to be up to that number, we would need 44 officers, so we would need 6 more officers.
Yeah.
I think it's a very difficult challenge.
Yeah.
I think we do need more officers. I think adding these two, or this one position anyways, does that same thing, because those numbers don't call for patrol officers, it just calls for sworn members. So I think it'll free up some of the other things. But we do need to get those numbers up, and we have not been working on that. I think the move to 38 officers, I think, was 2015.
Yeah.
And that was a good move. I think that we need to work on getting those numbers up. This year is a prime example. In 7 months, having an average of almost 7 officers not here for 2 weeks out of those months is almost 6 officers. It impacts us significantly.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, again, very different scenario than the trees, but as we step back and look at this,
Yeah.
so we've got the current year, and then we've got the next, 2, 3, 5 years, and it's really, this is, I think what I'm hearing is this is the main priority right now, but we can't lose sight of that we still need to staff the department entirely.
Yes, absolutely. This is definitely, because I think that there are some other issues that this will help with. Our continue towards excellent service. I think this will get us there better right now than adding personnel. But I've discussed that there are many different options that we have. We could add 2 more officers in addition. We could add 3 more officers in addition. We could add an accreditation specialist for a much lower salary than for a police officer, and make a slow move from our current officer who does accreditation, or who does primarily accreditation, to another aspect.
Yep.
So I think there are some chances or some opportunities that we do have. I've had some extensive conversations with the police commission about it. In 2019, the structure with the deputy chief was approved by them, and then this year, the structure of adding a 3rd lieutenant and a deputy chief was approved by them.
Yeah, and I think that's important to notice. This is a conversation that's been going on for 24 months.
Well, I was going to
Yes.
refer to, I had a police a constituent who is also a police commission reach out to me and refer back to this January 22nd letter to the board. We're talking about increasing the patrol officers by at least 2,
Yeah.
I think, and also getting the deputy chief.
Yeah.
So I know you're pushing for the deputy chief. It's here as a potential item for us, right?
Correct.
But, so you're basically saying the additional officers right now are not a request? I'm just referring to what they had asked for. So I wanted to make sure I get it out here.
No, sure.
And
Sure.
before you can, and on that, just, you can answer maybe all at the same time. How many, simplistically, I don't need to be, how many patrolmen does $184,000 buy us?
Well, the 184,
That's one per.
No, but if we were to
Oh, if we were
repurpose
to
that
switch
money.
it?
Yeah, so that's not salary. I mean, that's
That's all in.
benefits, that's
Yeah,
everything.
okay, well, so that's still a,
Potentially 1.5.
that's an add to complement, right?
With
That's not pure add to
benefits and
staff.
overtime, training, we do have that number. It's still over six figures
Yeah.
for one patrol officer, yeah.
But you could argue the other overtime cost comes down
Right,
to some extent.
You have a significant drop in overtime.
right.
Some.
It's,
Get some.
That just helps me.
we gotta go up by,
So-
what, 4 or 5 officers to really get a dent in that overtime cost?
Yeah, so, so we have had better years
Yeah.
than this year. So 2018 was a better year. I think we averaged about 2 to 3 officers that were out that same period of time, as opposed to what, it's basically doubled, just over doubled for this current year. So, it hasn't always been this case. It all depends on sort of what's happening with, with the health, I guess, of the officers. But, throwing 1 or 2 officers on may decrease some of the overtime. It will, or I should say, yeah, it will, but I don't know if that's going to be such an impact. It will impact other ways, definitely a positive impact, having more officers. If you're asking me if we need patrol officers right now or these 2 positions, if that was the only choice, it would be these 2 positions here because of everything else we have going on, making this a much better decision to move
Well,
forward.
from a dollar cost perspective, unless I'm misinterpreting this, the 1 sergeant to lieutenant is that's a $5,000 increase. So that's
That's a promo.
we can just do that any day, right? So, but the hard
Yep.
addition of a human body, that's $184,000. That's a lot. So I don't doubt there's any I'm just trying to say which one, if they've got to happen, which one happens first, and it's a better way to skin the cat. You're saying that you'll bet all of your chips on that.
Yes.
Okay.
But I want to be clear, and please, clerk, correct me if I'm speaking for you. You're saying this year, but next year or the year after, we do need to address those patrol officers.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's
So,
just not right now, but that is still a problem.
so my wish list is if we could address it now, we could. I mean,
Yeah.
the proposal is, the original proposal is almost $500,000
Yeah.
more to get us to that number.
I'm just trying to make sure it's clear to everybody, because we all hear different things, and when it goes up to the Board of Finance, we're not saying that we never need more patrol officers.
Right.
But as we do 1, 2, and 3 on the list, this is 1, the patrol officers are 2 or 3, next year or the year after, they're gonna be 1.
Ideally,
have
to
to
make
deal
a
with this.
a big improvement toward that per capita number, to, I think, make a big improvement on the amount of overtime that's expended, it would be almost that 15% increase, which means 5 bodies, 4 officers and a CALIA, or accreditation specialist, a civilian.
Maria, were you going to add anything?
Sure. So just a quick overview. I know in the past we've talked about, I receive many service improvement requests. Usually it's over 24. So when I'm really, looking at the overall organization as a whole, it's really sifting through those requests and saying, okay, what are we in the most need of? The chief did mention that to add all of those patrol officers, not including a cruiser, that's just the person, the benefits, and essentially the equipment that they wear. We were looking at over $500,000. And again, when we're really talking about what we felt the most critical need of all of their service improvement requests, that the one before you is the one that we felt was most important. Also then trying to juggle other, needs of other departments, but we felt that for this department was the most important. But we've also talked about, in terms of the analysis and building the case for additional officers, that the department has already done a really good job of looking at that per cap, but also wanting to dig a little deeper into things like calls for service, response times, the types of calls for service, Part 1 crime, et cetera. So we want to come to you with a very comprehensive package when we're getting to that point of asking for more frontline staff. But again, at this point in time, we felt that this was the most important priority for the department.
Just to say it another way, all of that analysis isn't gonna change this.
Correct, that's
So I
correct.
want to be clear to our friends at the Board of Finance, we should not wait for that
That's
analysis
correct
to
for
do
this.
this.
This is really a different issue.
This is independent
Yeah,
of all of that.
Correct.
And when you use the per capita number, just, did you say it, that includes the 3 of you or not?
It does.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so the FBI tracks these numbers nationwide, and they use a per capita for sworn. They don't designate a rank. It's not for somebody out on the street. It's sworn members. And then when I did my research in Connecticut, it's sworn members also.
And I apologize for not, it's shame on me for not knowing who's on the street, who's not on the street.
Sure.
It's in my mind. But is a sergeant somebody who's more likely to be on the street than a
No.
lieutenant is?
No,
And
so-
are we
well,
losing?
yes,
Then
that
then
is-
are we losing patrol value or access there because that person's now moving into a more of a
Yes.
management role?
Yes. So right now, we have about 24 members that are assigned to patrol. Of those, most of those are officers, and then there are currently, right now, 6 sergeants on that patrol. All the other members of the department are assigned to other things besides patrol, detectives,
Detectives, yeah.
community services, training. But you are correct. So early 2018 maybe, we assigned an additional sergeant to our day shift. And the reason for that was, we would then, every day, 2 sergeants would be scheduled to work. And that would allow us to, break one free for training, easier, without it costing us overtime, because there were only a total of 9 sergeants in the department to choose from. Or allow that sergeant to work on administrative projects for us. That never happened, because it just wasn't able to happen. We just never had the staffing to allow that officer or that sergeant to be pulled to perform other projects. It did help, and we keep tracking how many supervisory overtimes that saved, having that sergeant, that additional sergeant on. But we haven't had that position now filled since September of last year. We've only been working with 6. You are correct that in this scenario, you would pull one of those sergeants from the 9, and that would be a lieutenant's position instead. So there'd be a smaller pool of sergeants to choose from to perform the supervision out on the road. But again, given the big picture, this is the best approach right now.
And the last one is just education on this point. Is it literally promoting one of your current sergeants? That the candidate you want, you have the candidate in mind, you have the person you want potentially?
So that's what this is. There are a couple options. I mean, one is to hire a new officer and promote from within. That's now an additional body. That's not $5,000. That's not what this is. Or a current sergeant to promote to lieutenant. The lieutenants are in the IBPO union. So to fill that union position of lieutenants, it has to come from within.
Any other questions?
Great, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
thank you, John.
So there's, I know we're running behind, and I appreciate everyone's patience. There's 2 things that I definitely want to make sure we get to today. One is the outside agency funding requests, and then the other is making sure that Jason has the chance to present the Board of Ed capital. But I wanted to begin with the outside agency funding requests. I've asked any organization that's applied for outside funding to come and give us more context around that request. And I just wanted to ask, anyone who's here from another organization, come on up and introduce yourself. And I just ask that you limit your remarks to about 5 minutes, and then we'll have time for any questions. Who would like to go?
Can we start
Yes.
with Heather? Is that okay? From Interval House? Heather from
Yes,
Interval
of course,
House?
yeah, come on up.
I understand this has been a long day for you all, so I will be brief. My
Thanks
name
for your
is.
patience.
Oh, of course. So my name is Heather Flannery. I am the Assistant Director of Interval House. And thank you so much for this opportunity to come and speak with you about the life-saving work that we do for residents of Simsbury. For those of you that may not be very familiar with us, Interval House is the state of Connecticut's largest domestic violence intervention and prevention organization. Our service area includes Simsbury as well as 24 other towns in the region. Interval House offers a broad range of services, including 24-hour hotline assistance, confidential safe house shelter, safety planning, counseling, support groups, children's programming, community education, and advocacy in the civil and criminal court systems. Our advocates are actually the ones that pick up the phone for those calls that the lieutenant mentioned in terms of the domestic violence calls here in town. For each of those services, we do offer them completely confidential and free of charge. They're offered to victims of abuse regardless of age, gender, race, religion, or income. As you well know, the news cycle brings us stories of victims of domestic violence on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. And some of those stories hit very close to home for your residents. In 2019, Interval House assisted 20 Simsbury residents through our shelter, crisis, and advocacy programs. We have helped a total of 88 people impacted by domestic violence in Simsbury since 2015. In those 5 years, we've seen a 50% increase in the number of contacts and the amount of time that we spend providing services to your residents. 3 of the cases from Simsbury last year came to us after an intervention and screening by the Simsbury Police Department, determining that they were at high risk for lethality. In these cases, victim residents of Simsbury indicated that they had been threatened with a weapon, physically choked by an abuser, and lived in fear that their intimate partner would kill them. In each of these cases, access to certified advocates, safety planning, information, and support helped to ensure that these residents of Simsbury did not become another fatal statistic on the evening news. I'm here today to thank you for Simsbury's steadfast support of Interval House in the past. This year, we've requested $1,800 in financial support from the town. It is an increase from the past, but reflects the rate of roughly $100 per client at which Interval House is supported by other towns with caseloads similar to Simsbury. Our projections suggest that between 18 and 24 residents of Simsbury will reach out to us for crisis intervention and life-saving help in calendar year 2020. Interval House's certified advocates will spend between 1 and 2 hours with each of these victims, helping to unpack the circumstances of their case and determine unique solutions to help as they transition to a safer future. In total, we estimate that Simsbury residents will require 288 units of skilled service. The funds requested represent a cost of $6.25, so a bargain, per client unit of service. This is a fraction of the cost that the town would have to invest to independently offer these interventions. We appreciate the many competing demands on your budget, and thank you for the opportunity to explain our request. We hope we can count on you in the future, and I'm happy to answer any questions about Interval House or other services.
Do you remember what, thank you. Do you remember what we were requested last year and approved 500?
So I can't recall the funding request last year. We have been, I think, for some time funding them at the amount of 500, and then they had made the increased funding request for this year. I believe the application was 1,500, but we can go back and double. 1,500.
Yeah.
1,500, yes. So an increase of $1,000.
And it's hard to say this out. I usually step on myself somehow, but I hope that our incidence isn't up, but that it's attributed to just so much better the services and the skill sets of our police department and Kristen and her team. But our incidents up dramatically. You said because
So I think it's difficult
identified.
to say
Yes,
because in some of the ways that the lieutenants were mentioning as well, sometimes these cases are more and more complex. So while the number of instances may not be rising, we are seeing more complicated impacts in terms of the time that our advocates spend safety planning, helping folks develop plans that may include any number of complicated issues that are involving sometimes substance use, mental health, really significant economic concerns, and taking the time to unpack that, spending time either on the phone, in person, offering shelter services, our family victim and, advocates in the court systems that are helping victims to navigate that process if an offender or an abuser is arrested, and all of the different things that they need in order to be safe and understand that process. So as the cases are more complex, as there's, the most difficult time for a victim in a domestic violence situation is when they do decide to leave or to speak up. That time is dangerous. There are many ways in which victims' lives are intertwined with their abusers, and making that break, that departure, takes time, effort, and energy. We're proud to be there standing alongside victims during that time period, offering skilled and experienced guidance and counseling. So to your point and your question, the instances, are fairly consistent year over year for the Simsbury area, but we do see the increases in the complexity and the severity of some
Yeah,
of these
thank you.
cases.
That wasn't a challenge, that's clearly
Sure.
educating me. It's
Of
not a
course.
challenge. Okay.
In the vein of education, talk to me about what's another comparable town or towns contribute to Interval House?
Sure. So we did include those numbers, I believe, in the full application. Towns.
These two. Yeah, we're kind of below everybody, pretty much right
Yes,
now.
so the town of Avon does fund us at $2,500. Town of Canton at $1,000. Glastonbury at $5,000. West Hartford at $3,000. So are some that are comparable.
Thank you.
in
Sounds like
terms
we're
of
pretty
cases.
pathetic in terms of what we're giving you.
Yeah.
Okay.
The increase would be significant in terms of, what we're able to continue to provide in terms of services to your residents.
I've been on this board for a long time, and I'm embarrassed to say I've not given this more thought in the past. It seems insufficient, even at the increased amount, considering, and in terms of other things that we fund in this community, we haven't always done a good job of prioritizing
Well, we'd
mental
be
health
happy to
and
ask for
domestic.
more next year.
I don't even require.
I'm actually, I'm not joking, I'm considering it strongly.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm tempted to deny your request and give you more.
Yeah,
I really mean-
that's,
I don't remember even seeing such a presentation in the past, so I don't think we would have not reacted. If I was you and I was selling it, I would have sold it just as hard as well and as due before we would have reacted the same way.
as well.
So, well, you're correct on that,
But-
but certainly there's a mistake here, so.
Yeah, I think we need to, again, I know we don't have a lot of money to go around, but
Could move some around.
I think we can figure this one out, and then some. Also, folks do an outstanding job every year of coming into town at the Riverview, so the
Yes,
folks that
thank
haven't
you.
been able to attend
Yeah,
that,
that was good.
that's a pretty amazing event, and I understand the Riverview folks help out with as well.
They do,
Yeah.
yes, and we're very appreciative of that. so.
So once again, also, we benefit because you're bringing folks into our community, too, so
Yeah.
we appreciate that.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
you.
very much.
Just feels shitty. I'm embarrassed. Let's win this, for the right reasons.
Hi.
Hi, Ferg.
Is it evening yet, or good
Not
afternoon?
yet.
I'll be
Afternoon
bright.
starts.
It's almost
be brief,
Sunday.
Be gone. Ferg Jensen, 3 Fox Den, West Simsbury. I've been on the board of the SCTV for longer than I can remember. And when I went on, both the Board of Ed and your organization gave us $5,000 a year. And and then it was halved during the financial crisis, and last year it was back up to 5,000. Since I went on the board, the price of a hamburger has doubled, okay? And as you know, with streaming and with dishes, our only outside source besides you people, and as much private as we can get, is the cable companies. And every year they go back. Last year, we had a deficit of over $3,000. And we're an all-volunteer organization. We hold the payroll as minimal as possible. And we do everything with the people who are filming you tonight, and Mary Glassman, our president, this morning. And I'm sorry that Nick Mason and Paul Hinault, who are kind of our financial guys, are not available tonight to talk. But we just think that we are due to support, our whole investment is Mark's technology to make the sound better, the video better and all that. And that's what we really need money for. And we're frugal, we're Yankees, but if we're going to continue to do all the organizations, the high school and all the boards and commissions, it's very important to people who can't get out and go to the meetings. We do that. I was just telling Mark, who's a technology guy, I don't know why lately, and I think maybe Comcast did it. When I turn on my TV now, it goes right to SCTV. I don't know why. I thought he did it, but he didn't. But it's magic.
Great, your
But,
ratings are way up.
without, Woody gave a very nice presentation to you in public audience, and you talked to Mary, and I won't belabor the point. I don't have 44 slides. I just have what I just said, but I would really appreciate you considering our request. And I don't know if you have any questions, or if you don't, I'll let you keep going.
No questions, folks, now.
Appreciate the work you folks do.
Thank you very much
We
for listening.
appreciate.
Appreciate it very
thanks.
much.
If the board is okay, I'd like to invite Jason Casey to come up and talk about the Board of Ed capital.
Yes, there are
Yeah.
that.
We're only doing this year's capital?
Yeah.
So yes, I'm Jason Casey, and I'm here to talk about the Board of Ed's capital projects. The two major projects we're looking at are the stadium bleachers and press box. They're estimating $850,000 for this work. Additionally, I'm going to speak about the district network infrastructure needs that we're looking for $500,000. So the stadium project, this is our bleachers and press box that was built in 1968. At that time, it was estimated to be 30 to 40 years life. So now at 52 years of age, we're certainly looking to replace that. There's been some emergency renovations to it to fix some rotting wood, but at this point, to make sure that we build a safe structure and get it that's ADA compliant, these are the funds that are currently estimated.
Can you go back to that for a second, please?
Sure.
So it says renovation to make ADA compliant loan was not recommended due to the cost? So help me understand that.
Sure. The issue there is whether we're going to replace or remediate. And the choice was not to do the $400,000 to fix the existing structure.
Yeah.
but to
This
instead-
is a takedown and rebuild.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a take it all down and start fresh.
What happens if we didn't do the press box? What happens if we just did the bleachers?
It's a connected structure, and they've had several issues there, and actually, a window actually fell in on somebody on that particular portion of it. The redesign, as I understand it, was said that it would be difficult to do that separately.
Oh, no, I think Sean's question was, what if you did
Just the bleachers?
a complete tear down, rebuild, minus a press box?
Correct.
Right, and I said that the consultants that developed that estimate looked at that, but in the shape that the press box was in, that was something they didn't feel was worthy of standing on its own either.
So you have
I
to
think
have a
it's
press
just- we
box,
have to
is
have a
what we're
press box?
saying,
What do you
right?
have a press
Yeah,
box
okay.
for?
To broadcast the game? You guys are
You can't put a camera on the
broadcasting the
sideline?
game, right?
If the press box is being replaced, there should be technology added to it as well.
Yeah? Oh, we're gonna add that in
I guess
too.
My point is I'm all for the safety, but can't you just put a camera on the sideline and not rebuild a structure that's antiquated?
I have to
Just-
refer back to the athletic director and what our options are there, but that's,
I thought, so maybe make crystal clear what I'm asking, I apologize if I'm not correct. So if we were to take down the existing bleachers and rebuild just the bleachers, absent the press box, do not add in a completely rebuilt
Right.
press box,
Right.
how much would that cost be? Did they have any idea, do you have any idea of that?
no, I
No?
haven't.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that number. And then how many teams actually use this field for games?
Off the top of my head, I know the rugby team, the track team, the football team, hundreds of students and staff throughout the year use this facility.
Yeah, I'll go for the usage. the lacrosse teams both use it, the soccer teams, every varsity sport plays on it. It's not, we need to make sure that we're not looking at this as a Friday night football press. The only thing that intrigues me is that the press box is, I believe, I like education on this, is somewhat more focused on the football aspect of the usage of the facility. The facility as a whole, the field is used by every single team multiple times.
Not every single team.
Varsity sports.
The crew team doesn't use it.
They have their own very specialized facility.
Yeah, which I'm
okay?
about to make a point on. So why did we make the crew team raise their own money to replace their roof and their own truck and trailers and facilities, yet we're gonna use taxpayer funds for this? Confused by the difference in how we're treating teams.
So multi-purpose facility.
It's still a high school team. We're making one privately fundraising and we're making another pay for taxpayers' dollars. Why the inequity?
I can't speak to that.
We should find that out, because I don't like the unfairness here where we're treating athletes different, especially with 150 boys and girls down at the boathouse. It seems like we're leaving one team out and prioritizing other teams, and that doesn't seem right.
Well, but
More people
I think there's,
We like football better is what probably the answer is, but.
no, my point is, I guess you'd say, well, that you've got so many more teams than just one program using the facility. I'm not saying it's any better or worse, I'm just saying, is that how somebody got their head around it? But I do think that almost all of the sports have to do, unfortunately, a fair bit of localized fundraising to support their own programs.
Yeah, but they don't have to put roofs over their own buildings. They don't have to buy their own boats.
I'm saying that not everyone
Pay
is.
for some of their own coaches.
Almost all of the programs do have to do fundraising, unfortunately.
I know
for
they
their
do.
own programs.
We don't know how much is going, right, what fundraising that's been done. Does any of it go to these facilities at all?
My frustration is we're spending yet another $1 million down there. We bought the field once, we're gonna buy the field twice. Now we're buying the bleachers, and we can't seem to find $75,000 for a roof to house town assets. And that's what bothers me, is we're picking winners and losers here, and I don't like that. So I'd like some answers on why we're treating teams differently at some point
And
here.
the crew boathouse is only used by crew, or is it used by the
I
Farmington
don't
Valley?
care what's used by,
I'm
it's used
just
by
asking.
athletes of the school system.
Is it used at all? I'm just asking, is it used by
It's
the
a Board of Ed
Farmington?
structure, from what I understand.
Okay, the boathouse?
I believe so. It's not owned by.
I
the
didn't know if
crew.
it was used by that river, the Farmington
No.
Valley
It is not.
crew,
They've been out of.
whatever they are. They're
Farmington Valley
gone?
Rowing Association.
They're
I was
gone?
former president of that. They're not in that building anymore.
Okay.
It doesn't seem right that we're making one team pay for a roof and we're gonna subsidize through taxpayer dollars a bunch of stands.
Just a question to follow up on Mark's point on the press box. If there is a press box, is it all technically up, is it like equipped for technology? I'm assuming it's got everything, you could plug and play to show, do we know if
To
that's
make
the
announcements,
case?
to work with the scoreboards, yeah, it's.
The
that's
broadcast from there?
I've never been in Woodcrest.
Okay, well, I don't know what's there today. I mean, I've
Obviously, in
never
full
been there either.
Disclosure, I was a rower.
The center should have.
Yeah, we,
Never would have guessed that.
You never would have known.
no, I
thought you
didn't
were
know
gonna
that
say
at all.
Frisbee golf.
The other guy on the board of selectmen's name's on the boathouse too, by the way,
Yeah.
so.
So I'd like to clarify, if I get it lost all. For me, thank you for the presentation. I'd love to know what the cost X, the press box is, because I don't know that, 30 years from now, are we gonna be broadcasting a high school football game, we spending how much just for high school? I played high school, I was on the team. And then my other question is, what the bigger issue I have, or question is that this is a massive infrastructure improvement. I mean, it's 1/20th of the junior high renovation, right? And so should this be taken in totality in this very large facilities master plan endeavor that we're undertaking? It should be part of that funding mechanism as well. That's my, because this to me, again, it's like we're in this nonstop piecemeal, it's not anybody's fault, but it just seems like we're in this nonstop piecemeal, one thing at a time funding process, and that's not to me strategic as a private business, and how I have to 5-year cascade plan. So that's my request.
Chris, I asked the same question, and that was also my concern. In the year that they're going to be coming to us looking for, and the Board of Finance, looking for money to renovate 5 elementary schools
Yeah.
and likely the middle school. Why are we spending $1 million on sports right now? And the thing that comes down to, though, the way it was explained to me, is it is a structural safety issue.
Magically this year, but it wasn't last year?
I'm,
I mean,
It was the last 3
don't shoot
years.
the messenger.
I'm just saying, if it was that high of a priority, why'd we do Henry James and not this first?
I'm 100% for, I'm 100% for the support of any sport in this town.
I-
100%. There's nothing we'll ever get, as far as I'm concerned, school athletics. But if if we decide to if we decide to bond for $144 million or $143 million, I'd rather be bonding for this project is part of that larger number than considering this in a localized budget event. That's my thinking philosophy. No?
Yeah, we've got grass redo next year and then $1.6 million for another turf field the year.
No, I don't have anything to say.
It's a
I
lot
wanted you to
here.
get your time.
Anyway,
Maria, I sent you, I have something to say.
Yes, so just, right, so the focus of the school facility master plan right now is on primarily the elementary schools, and then the question of, where do we place, now at this point, 6, which could then result potentially in some additional bonding costs for the Henry James Middle School. My understanding is that because the high school had been comprehensively renovated in the not-too-distant past, again, that the facilities master plan is not focusing on that. So for the purposes of presenting the capital plan, if you'll notice, it's really a focus on known projects that the Board of Ed would like to tackle at the high school. They held back from presenting any large-scale projects for the middle school or the elementaries because of the facilities master plan. So I did just want to point out that is why there's a focus on the capital plan on the high school projects. Again, those are sort of known projects for that particular facility that they would like to work on, but that is sort of separate from the master planning process that's going on for the other schools.
and I appreciate that, but I mean, and I'm not shooting the messenger here, but these are out of touch with the fact that we're gonna spend somewhere between $40 and $60 million on our schools. in the
More than
next
that.
decade. Or more than that.
Possibly more.
More than that.
Possibly more.
Yeah.
140.
Yeah.
So I guess it's
For the next
just,
5 years, right?
we already don't have the debt capacity for anything else, and it's just, I don't know, we need to step back and look at all of this together.
Yeah.
I like where Chris was talking about it. Having said that, I have no issue with the district network infrastructure, because that's been around for a decade.
Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
We're not shooting them, we're just,
I don't know if he's even done.
okay. No, the first part.
One more
The first
slide.
part.
I think.
Yes, so historically, each year we've done this, network infrastructure upgrades. And in this year, we have an unusual circumstance in that we have 2 relatively high-ticket items that are coming due at the same time. So our server infrastructure, which is 7 years old, currently doesn't support the latest versions of VMware, which is our virtualization software. It's this virtualization software that lets us support 110 virtual desktops out to the users. And those desktops currently are based on Windows 7. So in order to get to Windows 10, we need to do some upgrades, which we can't do on the current level of hardware. So that's the biggest challenge. Along with that, we have our core routers, which have gone end of life for both security and for issues of glitchy behavior that we've started to see. These units certainly need to be replaced. So this is the core switching equipment that all network traffic runs through, both internally and to get out to the internet. And then lastly, we want to replace our off-site backup. This is a unit that makes sure that all the backups that we're running are not located in the same location as the actual live data itself, which as of right now, we've outgrown the previous off-site system, so literally the backup data we have is in the same room as the data that is live. If we were to have some catastrophic event in that space, we would lose all of the data. So that is a high priority to get that off-site again.
One step further, are we looking at housing that data off-network? Because it's still a substantial exposure to have the backup on the same network.
This would put it on the same network. It would put it at a different location. We've gone back and forth over whether to go with cloud storage or not versus having this physically in a different school. Internally, we have a 10 gig wide area network. So the large advantage to keeping it local is the extremely fast restore times that we have if we did have to go back to this particular data.
Agreed, but if the network is compromised, there's going to be nothing to restore because the backup will have gotten encrypted as well. In these days, day and age ransomware, if it's on the network, they're going to get both sides of it. So we really ought to think about a contingency as a town and as a Board of Ed of off-site. Because again, not your fault, but if all the data's on the same network and the network is compromised, consider the backup gone.
Right. We do have some offline storage as well. but
Okay.
this-
Okay.
Is there, just a question, so the town is doing, we're looking at the network storage solution, right?
Yes.
And is there any I mean, you guys are incompatible, your networks, is that, is there any way that can you facilitate some of your storage needs if you're just, is that can't get it there because of how the networks are set up?
Not completely incompatible, but as of now, what they're looking at is moving from a system that is incompatible into something else.
That isn't, or is?
That is incompatible to
Right, so they're
something
moving to
else.
something else, so I was just wondering if there a potential there to store your stuff on this new, whatever we're gonna have in the town.
Well, right now, that's in the same data center.
Right, well, right, but you're in a different data center, or you may,
This is all at the high school, both
Yes.
the town and
Yeah,
the
so-
school district.
okay, so you're saying that's not a potential,
We've had conversations about it, but
Okay.
it's a fairly different use case. My environment tends to be a lot larger than what Rick is working on, so the types of solutions afforded to him have to do more with things that are more user-friendly on the management side, and mine scales up to a much larger amount.
okay, you're
That's-
just looking to put the stuff somewhere. Okay, thanks.
Any more questions?
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
with us today. So it's been a long day, and I wanted to suggest that we table the rest of the agenda until Monday.
Wednesday?
Um,
Monday or Wednesday?
Well, we're
Hopefully we'll have some time Monday to start kind of, getting back into budget. I'd like to try and at least tackle, the wrap-up. If we have time on Monday evening to finish everything, great. I know I had asked folks if they could tentatively hold Wednesday evening. So I would say, at the end of Monday night, if we haven't wrapped up, we can go ahead and say, okay, let's, do the finish up on Wednesday evening. I don't think that there's actually a lot left to really get through, what we have on the agenda. I think the way that we've laid out the handful of policy questions and some of those really, kind of key things for you to think about, the way we've laid it out and presented options, and in some cases we've shown, okay, well, if we do this is the mill rate impact, this is the impact to taxpayers. So hopefully we've laid out the last little bit on the agenda here in such a way that will help us move through some of those discussion items quickly. But you'll also recall we'll have the spreadsheet for you. So as you want to start adding things, taking away things, again, we'll be able to show you how that affects the mill rate. So we've got that prepared and ready to go for discussion. We really, again, don't have very many slides left. So what we can do is also email those to you, so you'll have those in advance, just to kind of start processing those 4 or 5 policy questions that we have left to kind of really dig into.
And we need to be prepared to prioritize capital, which is not a quick conversation.
Right. So again, Wednesday night may be needed, since we've
Yeah,
had a fairly long day
I don't want to
today.
short shift that because we're going to have to come back and do it again after the
Right.
finance, and I'd
Right.
rather,
just avoid it.
rather just get ahead of that.
Right.
Because they're going to ask us when we go in, and rightfully so. We've got to pick our tops and bottoms and everything else there.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Nice job
Thank
today,
you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank
Really
you,
good.
guys. Thank you,
Today.
everybody. Thank you, Dave Bush's wife.
I didn't get one of those. Did you eat them
Scones
all?
are always
Oh,
welcome.
Yeah, you did.
I took one.
Made a mess.
There's none left out there.
Well, that's, for me, they really.